Let's talk about an issue that's made the papers today, and it's this. It's on the front page of the Telegraph. The UK Inequalities and Human Rights Commission, EHRC, is facing a special review of its international accreditation after lobbying by trans rights groups led by Stonewall, that is the LGBT plus charity. The review by the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions, the GANHRI for short, could threaten the ability of the UK to take part in UN discussions on human rights. Reaccreditation to continue to be a part of these discussions takes place regularly, and the EHRC went through this process successfully only last year. Well, to unpick why this review is happening and the potential consequences for the organisation and the UK standing in global human rights, I'm joined by the chair of the EHRC, Baroness Faulkner. Welcome to Woman's Hour.
Great to be here. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Well, talk us through it. Talk us and the listeners through it. Your initial response to the EHRC facing a special review. So why was this special review called?
So before I answer that question, the first thing I want to do is to assure all your listeners that we are here to protect and promote their human rights, to defend their human rights day in and day out. And we will continue to do that irrespective of what happens here. But you raise an interesting question about why we think this has happened. We went through a very successful reaccreditation process that takes place every 5 years. It was the third time we were reaccredited, and we were reaccredited for 5 years. And that was only decided last October. So we had to ask ourselves, what has led to this request? Back in April, which is when when they requested us, just a few months after we'd been reaccredited, as to why this was happening so soon and again. And there was only one issue that I think was at all controversial in this intervening period, and that was the advice we had given to the Minister for Women and Equalities, Kemi Badenoch, on clarifying the definition of sex in the Equality Act. So the Equality Act, it uses the words sex and gender interchangeably. But what your listeners might wish to understand is that sex means whether you're a man or a woman, whereas gender is a more fluid, everyday description, actually. And by a piece of legislation not being clear in that regard, this leads to a lot of confusion for service providers, for public sector organizations, private sector organizations, as to when they need to uphold, shall we say, the rights particularly of women as a protected characteristic versus the rights of trans people who may be legal women or legal men through a different process and category. And we were very aware of this continuing confusion. There was a lot of litigation continuing to take place, and you will have seen a lot of media interest in this area as well, starting from schools, going right into the delivery of public services, NHS, and so on. We were asked by the Minister to advise her on whether there needed to be clarification in the Act, and we did so. And that's how we got here.
And your clarification, so that everybody listening knows, was to lean towards a biological definition of sex as the fairest way of protecting everybody's rights.
Yes. So we reviewed this over 6 months because we had started the review even before she formally advised us, because we were aware of how much money we were spending, public money, in litigation, advising other organizations. Last year, we had produced single-sex spaces guidance exception, single-sex spaces exceptions, which was guidance to help. We thought that would resolve the matter. But it became evident to us over the preceding months that it didn't really provide the clarification that we hoped it would. And therefore, we came out on the wrong side of Stonewall and other groups in this regard.
Well, Stonewall have said in response that they think your organisation is a failed institution rolling back the rights of trans people. I guess their argument is if you are advising government that the legal definition of sex should be biological sex, that takes protections and rights away from trans people in the eyes of the law. They have a point, don't they?
No, they don't have a point. Because they're misinterpreting what we've said. And I suggest that people look up the letter. It is up on our website, the advice we've given to government. It is up on the EHRC website. All we did was that we advised the government to review whether, because we don't have the resources to do that, and frankly, consultations are a matter for government. They're not a matter for a regulator like us. All we did was advise the government that it may find that there is greater clarity in defining in some narrow areas that biological sex strikes the right balance.
And what are those areas you have in mind?
And by the way, could I just pick up the point about Stonewall defining us in the antagonistic way that they do? This was their third attempt at the UN. And the question I think we have to ask of Stonewall is, what is it about their national rights institution whereby they think they can't engage with us here in the UK on the ground, but go externally to the UN to complain about us? Why do they feel that they need to escalate matters when we have been cooperating with them, consulting them, and working with them over all these years?
Okay, well, I can't speak for Stonewall, and we haven't had an answer from them on that one. But I wouldn't just redirect you to my question. When you said to the government, "This is our advice," in narrow areas, what that sex should be defined as biological. That'll clear things up. What are the areas you're talking about?
The areas we're talking about are freedom of association for lesbians and gay men, whereby they have the right to form an association. It's about pregnancy and maternity, where trans men have fewer rights at the moment, actually. This definition would improve the rights of trans men. Positive action. Currently, trans women with the GRC could benefit from women-only shortlists. Trans men with the GRC could not. So actually, there are areas where even trans people, depending on which category, whether you're a trans woman or a trans man, would have enhanced protection.
And what about single-sex spaces? That would leave trans people out of those areas?
No, because trans people, if they have the protections under the Gender Recognition Act, which is what all trans people do, they would still continue to have their protections under that act. It is, I'm afraid, a complex area, and that is why I advocate that people read our letter very carefully, because it was a long letter written after deep thought and consultation. Your listeners might like to know we considered this matter over 6 months, over 11 hours of deliberation, and 150 pages of legal and policy and other advice. It was not something we came to lightly, but we're required by law, Section 11 of the Equality Act, to advise government on the areas where we're the regulator.
So just in synopsis, you would say that what you're suggesting enhances the rights of trans people, doesn't diminish them, and Stonewall have got the wrong end of the stick.
What we're saying is that it enhances trans people's rights in some areas. In some limited areas, it might impact them negatively, but we believe that those negative effects can be countered by the use of the gender recognition protections, which are a different protection. We were looking at sex in the Equality Act, which is in shorthand about women's rights. We were balancing the rights of women versus the rights of a very small number of trans people. And we think those very small number of trans people whose rights might be negatively impacted will be covered through a different category, which is gender reassignment.
Thank you so much for joining us, Baroness Faulkner. She is the chair of the EHRC. We have a statement from Stonewall, and it's this. Robbie DeSantos, Director of External Affairs at Stonewall, says all countries need effective, independent national human rights institutions to promote and protect human rights, with anti-trans hate crime and prejudice rising and Britain sliding down the international rankings on LGBTQ plus rights. LGBTQ plus people in Great Britain need a more robust and independent human rights watchdog. We hope that this special review will give the EHRC the scrutiny and recommendations it needs to play the part our communities deserve. You are listening to Woman's Hour now.